During what seemed like a perfectly normal Sunday dinner at my sister's house in Willowbrook Heights, my 12-year-old daughter Zara texted me from across the table. "We need to leave right now." I looked up at her, confused, but something in her eyes made me trust her completely. That decision, to listen to my child, changed everything. When I discovered what she had noticed that I missed, I realized my family wasn't who I thought they were, and staying would have destroyed us all. Let me back up and tell you how we got there, because the details matter more than I realized at the time. The plan was simple: Sunday dinner at Aunt Natasha's house in Willowbrook Heights, one of those upscale suburban communities where every lawn looks like it belongs in a magazine and the HOA sends passive-aggressive letters about mailbox colors. Me, Zara, and my husband Trevor would drive the 35 minutes from our modest apartment in Clearwater to Natasha's sprawling Mediterranean-style home where she lived with her boyfriend Phoenix and their 3 children. It was supposed to be routine, the kind of family obligation that feels more like checking a box than making memories, but one that I'd been guilted into maintaining for the past 2 years. I'm Adriana, 30 years old, and I pride myself on being observant. I work as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown, literally trained to notice things that don't add up, to spot patterns in numbers that tell stories people don't want told. I can find discrepancies in financial records that would make your head spin, catch embezzlement schemes that have been running for years, and identify money laundering operations from spreadsheets that look perfectly innocent to the untrained eye. But somehow, on this particular Sunday in late October, I was completely blind to what was happening right in front of me. The irony wasn't lost on me later. Here I was, someone who made a living finding hidden truths, and I'd been missing the biggest lie of all. Zara had been quiet during the drive over, which wasn't entirely unusual for her. At 12, she was already showing signs of that pre-teen complexity, sometimes chatty and engaged, other times withdrawn and contemplative. She'd been spending more time on her phone lately, but not in that mindless scrolling way that worried some parents. Zara was different. She watched people. She noticed things. She asked questions that made adults uncomfortable, the kind of questions that revealed she was paying attention when everyone assumed she wasn't. Trevor was humming along to some indie folk station, completely relaxed in the passenger seat. My husband of 8 years was one of those naturally calm people who assumed the best of everyone until proven otherwise. He worked as a graphic designer for a small marketing agency, spent his weekends building elaborate Lego sets with Zara, and had never met a family gathering he couldn't find something positive about. His optimism used to charm me. Now, sometimes, it made me feel like I was carrying all the family skepticism by myself. It was one of those perfect October days in Northern California when the air is crisp, but the sun still warms your skin through the car windows. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the hills around Willowbrook Heights in shades of gold and amber that looked almost too beautiful to be real. I remember thinking as we pulled into Natasha's circular driveway that her house looked like something from a home renovation show, all clean lines and expensive landscaping, with a 3-car garage and solar panels that probably cost more than my annual salary. Natasha's house always smelled like a combination of vanilla candles and something vaguely medicinal that I could never quite identify. The living room was decorated in that modern farmhouse style that was trendy a few years ago. Lots of white furniture, barnwood accents, and decorative signs with inspirational quotes in cursive fonts. It looked expensive but felt cold, like a model home where real people weren't supposed to actually live. The layout was one of those open concept designs where the kitchen flowed into the dining area, which opened into the living room, creating this massive space that was supposed to feel welcoming, but instead made every conversation echo slightly. Phoenix was outside on the back patio, manning an elaborate outdoor kitchen setup that included a built-in gas grill, a smoker, and a pizza oven that I was pretty sure had never actually been used for pizza. The man took his barbecuing seriously, treating it less like cooking and more like a performance art piece. Their 3 kids were scattered around the house in their usual positions. The twins, Austin and Bryce, both 15, were sprawled on the sectional couch in the living room, controllers in hand, completely absorbed in some first-person shooter game that involved a lot of shouting and what sounded like explosions. Their younger sister, 11-year-old Kensington, was curled up in the breakfast nook with an iPad, wearing noise-canceling headphones and completely disconnected from the family chaos around her. Everything seemed normal, or at least what passed for normal in Natasha's house. My sister was buzzing around the kitchen with her characteristic nervous energy, arranging appetizers on a series of white ceramic plates that probably cost more individually than most people spend on their entire dish set. She kept checking her phone, a habit that had gotten worse over the past year, though I had attributed it to her usual anxiety about hosting and her need to document every family gathering with perfectly staged Instagram photos.
Natasha had always been the type of person who needed everything to be perfect, at least on the surface. Even when we were kids, she'd spend hours arranging her room, making sure every stuffed animal was positioned just right, every book aligned on the shelf. As an adult, that perfectionism had translated into this house that looked like a magazine spread and a social media presence that made her life appear enviably flawless. But there were cracks, if you knew where to look. The way she'd started drinking wine earlier in the day during these family gatherings, the tension in her shoulders that never seemed to fully relax, the quick, sharp way she'd speak to Phoenix or the kids when she thought no one was listening, the phone calls that would send her stepping outside, speaking in low, urgent tones before coming back inside with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'd noticed these things, filed them away in the part of my brain that cataloged inconsistencies, but I'd explained them away. Natasha had always been high-strung. She'd always been particular about appearances. She'd always been a little dramatic. I told myself that whatever was going on was just typical family stress, maybe some marriage issues or financial pressure from maintaining such an expensive lifestyle. Phoenix kept stepping inside to grab different seasonings, beer, and ice, the typical dance of someone trying to perfect their grilling game. He was one of those guys who talked a lot but didn't actually say much, filling silence with commentary about marinades and cooking temperatures, while somehow managing to avoid any real conversation. I'd never particularly liked him, not for any specific reason I could articulate, but there was something about his overly casual demeanor that felt practiced, like he was playing a character rather than just being himself. He'd been part of Natasha's life for about 3 years, moving in after what she'd described as a whirlwind romance that had started when his catering company handled an event at her real estate office. Phoenix claimed to be some sort of entrepreneur, always talking about various business ventures and investment opportunities, but I'd never been entirely clear on what he actually did for work beyond the occasional catering gig. Trevor seemed to get along fine with him, bonding over sports and craft beer, but Trevor got along with everyone. He had this gift for finding common ground with people, asking just the right questions to get them talking about their interests. It was one of the things I'd fallen in love with about him, his genuine curiosity about other people, his ability to make anyone feel heard and interesting. We'd been there maybe 45 minutes when my phone buzzed. I was sitting at Natasha's dining table, a gorgeous live edge walnut piece that probably cost more than my car, listening to Phoenix explain his dry rub technique, while Natasha arranged and rearranged the place settings with the precision of someone setting up for a photo shoot. The text was from Zara, who was sitting directly across from me, her phone discreetly hidden beneath the table. I almost smiled. Kids these days would rather text than speak, even when you're in the same room. It was a generational quirk that simultaneously amused me and worried me, this preference for digital communication, even in face-to-face settings. But when I read the message, my amusement evaporated instantly. We need to leave right now. I looked up at her, expecting to see typical preteen drama. Maybe she was bored, maybe the twins had said something mean, maybe she'd had enough of Kensington's iPad volume bleeding through her headphones. Instead, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Zara was staring at me with an intensity I'd never seen before. Not the dramatic urgency of a 12-year-old who was bored or wanted to go home early. This was different. This was fear. Real fear. The kind that makes your peripheral vision sharpen and your heart rate spike before your conscious mind has even processed what's wrong. Her eyes darted quickly toward the kitchen, where Natasha was now pulling something from the oven, then toward the patio door, where Phoenix was visible through the glass, then back to me. She gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head, a tiny movement that somehow communicated volumes. My daughter had inherited my observational skills, but she'd also developed something I sometimes lacked, the ability to trust her instincts without needing to understand them first. Where I would analyze and question and look for logical explanations, Zara would simply know when something was wrong. I texted back quickly, "What's wrong?" Her response came immediately. "Can't explain. Something bad. Trust me." The thing about being a parent is that you spend the first few years of your child's life being their entire world, making every decision for them, protecting them from dangers they can't even perceive. But somewhere along the way, if you're doing it right, you start to realize that they're developing their own instincts, their own ability to read situations and people. The challenge is learning when to trust those instincts, even when they conflict with your own adult assumptions about what's safe or normal.
Looking at Zara in that moment, seeing the fear in her eyes despite the ordinary chaos of family dinner happening around us, I made a choice that would change everything. I decided to trust my 12-year-old daughter's judgment over my own adult rationalization. I stood up from the table, trying to keep my expression neutral despite the adrenaline that was starting to course through my system. "Trevor," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "we should get going. I just remembered Zara has that project due tomorrow." It was a lie, and not even a particularly good one, but it was the first excuse that came to mind. Trevor looked confused. We'd driven all this way, we'd barely eaten, and Zara's homework had never been urgent enough to cut a family visit short before. "What project?" Natasha called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that slightly sharp edge it got when her plans were disrupted. "You just got here. I made dessert." "It's a big history assignment," I said, walking toward where our jackets were hanging by the front door, hoping my movement would encourage Trevor and Zara to follow. "We should have checked her schedule before coming over." Phoenix appeared in the doorway from the patio, tongs still in his hand, looking annoyed. "The steaks are almost done. Can't the project wait an hour?" "School's really important to us," I said, avoiding eye contact while I grabbed our jackets. "You know how it is." But the truth was, I didn't know how it was. I didn't know why we needed to leave, why Zara looked scared, and why every instinct I had was suddenly screaming at me to get my family out of that house as quickly as possible. All I knew was that my daughter, who had never lied to me about anything important, was telling me we were in danger. Trevor was looking between me and Zara, clearly trying to read the situation. He wasn't oblivious. He'd picked up on the undercurrent of tension, the way Zara had gone completely silent, the forced casualness of my excuse. But he also knew me well enough to recognize when I was operating on instinct rather than logic. "Okay," he said slowly, standing up from the table. "Let's go." Natasha's expression shifted from confusion to something harder to read. Disappointment mixed with something that might have been relief? "Well, this is disappointing," she said, but there was something in her tone that didn't match her words. "I was looking forward to spending time with you all." "We'll do it again soon," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if that was true. The next few minutes felt like they lasted forever and happened too quickly at the same time. Gathering our things, making polite but hurried goodbyes, deflecting questions about when we'd reschedule. Zara moved close to my side, not clinging but staying within arm's reach in a way that reinforced my decision to trust her instincts. As we walked toward the car, I caught Phoenix and Natasha exchanging a look that I couldn't quite interpret. It lasted only a second, but there was communication in it, some kind of silent conversation that excluded everyone else in the room. "Drive normal," Zara said as we got into the car. "Don't look back." Those words sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the October evening air. Don't look back. Why wouldn't we look back? What was there to see? But I followed her advice. I backed out of the driveway at a normal speed, waved goodbye through the window like we were just ending a typical family visit, and drove toward the main road without glancing in the rearview mirror. It wasn't until we'd been driving for about 10 minutes, not speaking, just the sound of the car engine and some soft indie music filling the silence, that I finally asked the question that was burning in my throat. "Zara," I said, my voice quieter than I had intended, "what did you see?" She was quiet for so long that I wondered if she was going to answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, but certain. They were scared of us being there. Not annoyed that we left early, scared that we stayed too long. Trevor turned in a seat to look at her. "What do you mean?" The way they kept checking their phones, the way Phoenix kept going outside but not actually cooking anything, the way Aunt Natasha kept looking at the clock, and the way they both relaxed when Mom said we had to leave. They wanted us gone, but they couldn't figure out how to make us leave without it being weird. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Zara said. "There's more, but I don't know how to explain it yet. Can we just go home, please?" As we drove through the darkening October evening past the perfectly manicured neighborhoods of Willowbrook Heights and back toward our more modest corner of the world, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about my sister, about family dinners, about trust and instinct, and the difference between paranoia and protection. What I didn't know yet was that Zara had saved us from something that would have destroyed not just our evening, but our entire lives. What I didn't know was that my 12-year-old daughter had recognized danger that I, with all my professional training in spotting deception and inconsistencies, had completely missed. What I didn't know was that this was just the beginning. Back home in our small 2-bedroom apartment in Clearwater, everything felt both exactly the same and completely different. Our place was modest compared to Natasha's showcase home. Older appliances, mismatched furniture we'd collected over the years, walls that needed repainting, and a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to move around comfortably. But it was ours, and after the strange tension of the evening, it felt like a sanctuary. Trevor started making tea, his usual ritual when he needed to process something. He was one of those people who worked through confusion by keeping his hands busy, brewing tea, organizing his desk, or sketching random designs in the margins of notebooks. I watched him move through our familiar kitchen, measuring loose-leaf Earl Grey into our chipped ceramic teapot, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Zara had disappeared into her room immediately after we got home, claiming she needed to work on homework that we all knew didn't exist, but I understood. Sometimes you need space to sort through your thoughts before you can explain them to other people. I'd learned not to push her when she withdrew like this. She'd talk when she was ready. "So," Trevor said, settling onto our worn sectional couch with his mug. That was weird. It was such an understatement that I almost laughed, except nothing about the evening felt funny. Weird how? I mean, obviously Zara saw something that spooked her, but even before that... He paused, staring into his tea like it might hold answers. "Did Natasha seem off to you tonight?" I had been asking myself the same question for the entire drive home. "She always seems a little off. That's just Natasha." "No, this was different." Trevor set down his mug and looked at me directly. "More intense, like she was performing being normal instead of actually being normal." The phrase hit me like a physical sensation. Performing being normal. That was exactly what I'd been sensing but couldn't articulate. That quality of someone working too hard to appear casual. The way actors sometimes overplay small roles and make them feel less authentic than the bigger, more dramatic ones. "And Phoenix," Trevor continued, kept finding excuses to check his phone. Every time he went outside for grilling stuff, I could see him through the window, and he wasn't looking at the grill. He was texting. That familiar forensic accountant instinct kicked in, the one that made me good at my job, the ability to spot patterns that didn't fit the expected narrative. How many times? At least 6 times in the 45 minutes we were there, maybe more.
Trevor had clearly been paying more attention than I had realized. And here's the thing that really bothered me. Every time he got a message, he'd glance back at the house before responding, like he was making sure no one was watching him. That cold feeling in my stomach deepened. In my line of work, I'd learned that people who were nervous about being observed were usually hiding something worth observing. Did you see what he was typing? No, but his body language was all wrong for casual texting. Too focused, too urgent, the way you text when something important is happening. I thought back to the evening, trying to replay Phoenix's behavior through this new lens. He'd claimed to be grilling, but now that Trevor mentioned it, I couldn't remember actually seeing him do much cooking. The elaborate outdoor kitchen setup, the performance of being the barbecue master, had it all been theater? There's something else, I said slowly, pieces starting to connect in my mind. Remember when we first got there, Natasha mentioned that the twins were going to their dad's house later tonight? Trevor nodded. Yeah, she said something about them having plans. But they were still there when we left, still playing video games like they always do, and neither of them seemed to be getting ready to go anywhere. My pulse quickened. What if she wanted us to think they were leaving, but they weren't actually going anywhere? Why would she lie about that? I don't know, but in my experience, people usually lie about timing when they're trying to control when other people are present for something. I stood up, too restless to sit still. Think about it. If we believed the twins were leaving soon, we might have assumed the evening would wind down early. We might have felt pressured to leave before they did, so we wouldn't be imposing on family time. Trevor was quiet for a moment, processing. That's pretty manipulative. Yeah, it is. The realization settled over me like a weight. My sister, who I'd always thought of as dramatic but fundamentally harmless, had been actively trying to manage our departure time. But why? That's when Zara's door opened, and she padded into the living room in her pajamas, looking younger than her 12 years, but with an expression that was far too serious for a child. Can I tell you what I saw now? She asked. Both Trevor and I immediately gave her our full attention. She settled into the armchair across from us, pulling her knees up to her chest in a way that made her look like she was protecting herself. It started when we first got there. Austin and Brace weren't really playing video games. What do you mean? I asked.
The TV was on, and they had controllers, but they weren't actually playing. The game was just sitting at the menu screen. They were watching us. Zara's voice was steady, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. Every time one of us moved around the house, one of them would track us with their eyes, but they were pretending not to. Trevor and I exchanged glances. Are you sure? I'm sure. I know what it looks like when people are actually playing video games. My friends and I play online together all the time. Austin and Bryce weren't pressing buttons, they weren't reacting to what was on the screen, and they weren't talking to each other the way you do when you're in a game. She took a breath. They were on lookout duty. The phrase sent chills down my spine. Lookout duty. Like they were watching for something or waiting for something to happen. And there's more, Zara continued. Kensington wasn't really using her iPad either. She had headphones on, but I could tell there was no sound coming through them. She was listening to everything we said. I felt like I was seeing the entire evening through a completely different filter now. What I'd interpreted as typical family chaos, kids absorbed in their devices, adults managing hosting duties, had actually been an elaborate surveillance operation. Why didn't you say something sooner? Trevor asked gently. Because I wasn't sure at first, and because Zara hesitated, looking uncomfortable. Because I didn't want to believe that Aunt Natasha would use her kids like that. But then Phoenix's phone started going crazy. What do you mean? Around the time we'd been there for maybe 30 minutes, his phone started buzzing constantly, like every few minutes. And each time it buzzed, he'd look at Natasha, and she'd nod, and then he'd go outside. Zara's eyes were wide, remembering. But here's the weird part. When he was outside, he wasn't just texting. He was making phone calls, short ones, maybe 30 seconds each. And after each call, he'd look back at the house and hold up different numbers of fingers. Fingers? Like hand signals.
I saw him hold up one finger, then later 2 fingers, then 3, like he was counting down to something. The room went completely silent except for the sound of our old radiator clicking on. I felt like I was putting together a puzzle, but I still couldn't see the complete picture. "There's one more thing," Zara said, her voice getting smaller. "When you said we had to leave for my school project, the way Aunt Natasha and Phoenix looked at each other wasn't disappointment, it was relief. Like they were thinking, finally, instead of too bad." Trevor ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his way of dealing with information overload. "So let me get this straight. We walked into what we thought was a normal family dinner, but actually we walked into some kind of, what? Surveillance operation? Setup?" "I don't know what it was," I said slowly, "but I think Zara's right. I think they wanted us gone, and they were waiting for something to happen after we left." The 3 of us sat in our small living room, surrounded by the comfortable clutter of our normal life, and tried to make sense of an evening that had turned our understanding of family completely upside down. What we didn't know yet was that Zara's observations had saved us from becoming unwitting participants in something that would have destroyed our lives. What we didn't know was that my sister's perfectly staged home had been the backdrop for something far more dangerous than an awkward family dinner. What we didn't know was that the real story was just beginning to unfold. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.